Okay, I'm recording. Once again, I just remind folks that if you miss a class or if you want to share any of these classes with someone else, uh, I've got they're going out on the YouTube channel. And if you want to know the YouTube channel, it's right there on these cards. I'll put them there. You can go out to the YouTube channel and basically look at all the classes we're doing here. All right. The spread of the New Testament. So we've already covered a little bit about some background in terms of why we can believe that the New Testament is inspired by God, that we read is in fact His Word, and His Word is to tell us how He'd like to relate with us. We'd like them, He would like us to relate to Him. But we also talked about the fact that it's written by lots of different people many, many years ago, and many, many copies have been made. So it's natural for us to ask, well, can we believe the book? And can we believe the copies that we've got? I know from personal effect, if I try to make 3 or 4 copies, the chance of me doing it exactly right, it's not too good. So how do we know the copies of what we have is correct? And then we'll start looking at how these various copies have proceeded over the years to become what the Bible is for us today. All right, so the New Testament basically spread by copies and travel. The initial spread was by voice. It was a oral kind of a history. The people just went from town to town and talked about it. But as the audience got bigger and bigger, and the distances became farther and farther, and the number of churches they had to cover, they started doing it on copies, on parchment, written on parchment or vellum, and by travel. So copies were very expensive and handled very carefully. I mean, today, I don't think anything of running 30 or 40 copies of my printer and throwing away half of them. It's just no big deal. Back then, making a copy of something was not only difficult, it was also very expensive, very expensive. The original copies were on papyrus and later on parchment. So papyrus is a paper that's made from the papyrus reed plants, pounded up, smooshed, and dissolved in water, spread out, allowed to dry, and become paper. It's not particularly stable. It doesn't last forever. It doesn't last anywhere near as long as one of our books. We've got books that have been sitting in the library for 1,000 years, and it's still quite readable. Back then, if you got a decade out of a book, that was fantastic. In most cases, copies just fell apart. Later on, when they realized that they had to hold on for a while, they switched over to parchment, which is basically a animal skin, and you shave it real thin and scrape all the everything off of the skin, save the skin, and let that dry, and that becomes something you can write on. And we're really kind of happy that they did that for several reasons. Obviously, it lasted longer. We still have some of the original vellum copies, but also when we want to reprint something, we can just throw the paper out and start again. When they want to recopy something, they go after a knife and scrape everything that they've written off, and then write it over again. And some of these parchments have got like 3 layers of stories, 3 layers of writings on it, and they're scraping them down and writing and scraping and writing. What we can do now is we can go in with some special instruments and tune the various wavelengths of the light and work our way down to and actually read the different layers. So they may have thought it was a way of reuse. We're getting 2 or 3 copies. We got what was originally used, and then if they did make a mistake and had to scrape, we can see how they fixed it. So for doing it on parchment was actually kind of nice. All right, so in 301, Emperor Diocletian issues an edict what a government's scribe salary should be. Remember I said this is rather expensive. By definition, a sentence that contains 15 syllables, right, any sentence that contains 15 syllables is called a stikos. And They were paid 25 denarii for 100 stikos of quality copy. And if it was a poor copy, they'd only get 20. But let's think about that. If you got 100 times 50, if you got 1,500 stikos, for us, that's a couple of pages, maybe 2, 3 pages. But they would get paid 25 denarii. What was a denarii worth back then? How about relative to a day's wages? What did the average worker get paid back then? About a denarii, okay? I mean, not everybody, but pretty much. So what you're saying is to make copies of a couple of pages, you got paid for 25 days' work. That's a month's work for the average person. Now, they were a little bit upscale. They did a little bit better than that. Give you an example of the cost. The Codex, let me back up a minute. Codex Sinaiticus. Not everybody's familiar with this. The original copies were papyrus and parchment. They're just flat sheets, and you stack them up and you put them away somewhere, read them. They found it was a lot easier to start scrolling these things together until eventually you had a long, sewn together bunches of them, and you could roll it up and carry a bigger book on the scroll. Then they went to what's called codex. Codex is what we have today. It's like a book. We actually turn the page, all right? So a codex is, there's like 4 or 5 codexes that were essentially the complete Bible from Genesis to Revelations. Well, Genesis to some of the New Testament. And this particular one, Codex Sinaiticus, which means the book that they found in the Sinai. That's all it means. That book is worth 30,000 denarii. If you were to say, I want a copy of that book, you had to come up with the equivalent of 30,000 days' labor. Or put 30,000 guys for one day. But one way or another, you're going to come up with just a plain old book for 30,000 denarii. All right? And if they did 100 stikos of quality, that's like 3,000 stikos. I mean, it's mind-boggling how valuable those books were and what they cost to reproduce. What the church would do is the church would hire a scribe and give him room and board, complete room and board, and pay him 750 denarii per year. So getting paid 750 denarii per year is a little over twice the average person's salary. All right? So they would be considered a rich man. All right? Yes, it was mostly men that did it. So they would get about maybe the equivalent of double the average salary and full room and board. Full room and board right back then meant just that. And you literally were housed by the king or the pharaoh, or whatever the case may be. And you had a room, they took care of you, they fed you, they entertained you. You had everything you need to live. And that included your family. So if you were married, you could bring your family in. And 2 years worth of salary per salary. So this is, making copies was a serious business. Question is, do we actually have an accurate copy? If you're making that many copies, is each copy perfect compared to the last copy? Can we truly believe what's written there was what was written way back when? So ask the question, do we have an accurate copy? We have more accurately copied manuscripts. And the way we do this, if you got the original manuscript, right? You got the original manuscript and 4 different churches wanted to have copies of it. So you take one of this original, you'd start splitting up the pages and swapping out and make 4 copies of that. And those 4 copies would then go out to 4 different churches. And chances are you had enough scribes. So it took almost a year to do that. This is not an overnight publishing company. But unfortunately, You never had the original, or you don't have the original, or the original's gone, all you've got is the 4 copies. Well, can I believe those 4 copies? Well, what we see is errors. And quite often you'll bump into folks that will say, well, I can't be a Christian. I can't follow the Bible. It was written by dozens of authors over thousands of years. And there's mistakes. There's mistakes all over the place, thousands of mistakes. And they're right. But how do we get around that? If I look at John 11:35, let's say copy 1 says, Jesus ept. Lost a letter. Jesus ept. But if I then go to copy number 2 and says, Jesus wept, I've lost another letter. And copy 3 says, well, Jesus is wet. And copy number 4 says, Jesus wept. What does the verse say? If I've got 4 copies and 1 or 2 or 3 of them are missing a letter somewhere, but I've got enough other copies to fill in what that letter is there any problem with coming up to Jesus wept? All right? This is the most common kind of errors. And as soon as you got a couple more copies, of which we have a lot, then this kind of error, while it makes for some horrendous numbers and big scary statements, it's not a big deal. Okay, it's not a big deal. For example, in the Bibles we're currently working with today, there's about 150,000 variants. 150,000 variants like this. How could you believe that? How could you believe that book? Well, we got 5,700 manuscripts. And one letter in one word in 2,000 manuscripts makes 2,000 variants. So if I make a mistake by a letter early in the copy process, 1,000 years later, I've got thousands of variants. But it's really the same letter that we figured out a long time ago. So that 150,000 is really not all that big. Okay? Plus, we also have a huge amount of manuscripts. 5,700 manuscripts. Remember back to the first class. Most of the writings from that period, that time period, we had 1, 2, 4, 5 copies, and the time frame between the actual happening and when they wrote it was like 2, 3, 500, 1,000 years. I've got 5,700 copies, and the time frame between when the New Testament was actually happening and when it got written down, almost all the cases of these originals is less than 100 years. That means that an awful lot of folks actually were there and saw it themselves. So if someone says, oh, yeah, I know Jesus, he's a crybaby. He wept. Or he wet. No, come on. He just cried because he was sorry about Lazarus. So the original variants like this is not something we should stop trusting the Bible for. Because of that 150,000, only 400 of those variances actually changed the meaning of the verse. There's a couple of examples where I think it's the word for light. It's like L-I-T and then L-E-T or something. The word for light, or maybe it's cap. Anyway, there's like a minor difference between the word for light and something else. But anyway, that difference technically changed the meaning of the sentence. Jesus said, I am the light. Well, yeah, no, the other one says, I am the light. So technically, that changed it. And we've got about 400 of these where it actually changes the meaning of the verse. But here's the key takeaway. Not one single one of those 400 affected an article of faith that was not abundantly documented elsewhere. And that's a key piece of information. The things that you need to know to be saved are throughout the New Testament. It's not just a list of 4 or 5 things in one place that if you mess up, you lose it. The things that are really critical, the salvational issues, are repeated time and time and time again by many different authors from many different places for different purposes. You have to work hard to not understand it, right? And then when you add all the other stuff, like recordings of all the sermons that the first fathers wrote and read back then, they're quoting it too. So, key takeaway, yes, when someone says there's 150,000 errors in the Bible, I can't believe it. Not one of those variants affects an article of faith that was not abundantly documented elsewhere. And that's your response. Of course, they may not accept it, but remember I said, a lot of people don't accept the Bible, not because they don't accept the Bible. They're not accepting the Bible because they don't want to have to change their lives around to do what the Bible says. They're not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. Okay? All right. Questions, comments, short sermons, speeches? Okay. Oh, there you go. Down the lower, I don't know if you can see that from here. Just for reference, the King James Version of the Bible has 783,137 words. Okay? So when you look at big numbers like this, you say, wow, that's a lot. Now, King James Version has 783,000 words in it. And 3,116,480 letters. So maybe if you miss a couple here and there, or you write scribbly such, A looks like a C, looks like a E, trust the Bible. All right. The other side of the coin here, do we have accurate copies? Suppose the original was still here. Suppose from back then they wrote it down in the Greek on a piece of parchment, and they stored it away, and they still have it, and we can go to the whatever museum and see it and read it, right? Or at least it claims to be the original. Is there any problem with that? Yes, there is a major problem with that. If I have something that is in my possession for almost 2,000 years, there have been multiple people that have had that in their possession. One person or one family or one museum or one church did not last without interruption for a couple thousand years. Do you think we can go through maybe 500 different generations without coming upon one generation that doesn't like something in that original, scrapes it and changes it? Bottom line is, if we look at today's events like that, look out on the internet, someone posts something on the internet and it's changed and spread as a lie all over the place. And now with AI, you can't believe pictures anymore. You can't believe articles anymore. All right? So bottom line is, if one person controlled the original for any length of time, one of those one persons would probably change it. How do we know that? Because we have situations of old documents. And invariably, there are variations in the documents after it's written. Now, how do we know that? Because we're back to the parchment, we're back to that machine, drilling down through 3 layers of corrections, and sure enough, what was controversial in this period of time got scraped out and something else written in that period of time. You cannot believe it. So if we haven't got the original, if we had got the original, and then we got a whole bunch of copies too, what are you going to trust? The original or the copies? I trust the copies. Because copy number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 were all over the place. They were scattered hither and yon. Copy 1 may have been in this country. Copy 3 may have been in another country. If I've got enough copies of something and 1 or 2 people decide to scrape and change something, it'll stand out like a sore thumb. I could have 150 copies of a particular verse in a particular book, and only 2 of them say something different. I'm going to go with the 148. So having many, many copies that are copied with care and precision, right? Copied. Remember, your salary was 25 denarii for 100 verses, 115 cylinder verses, and it dropped to 20 if they found any mistake. That's a 20% reduction in salary. Would you folks feel a 20% reduction in salary? Would it bother you if somebody cut your salary 20% and said, I didn't like your work? You'd be all over them. And same thing. So having multiple copies in many different places over many time periods is actually better than having the original that was written almost 2,000 years ago. Yeah.
If my faith is rock solid, why would I worry about what some skeptics say? Because his word is not valid.
Because the Bible also tells me that I should be working on getting him in.
Is what?
Because the Bible also tells me I should love him, concerned about him.
I didn't say not to love him first.
No, and trying to work him in.
I mean, there are people out there who don't believe the Bible, and I say, well, it's your problem.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not gonna spend the rest of my days trying to prove you something.
Oh no.
It just didn't happen.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, you're not gonna win a whole lot of them actually. I mean, I've been out there doing it, and the number of converts you get is an embarrassingly low number. But what I feel, and this is my opinion, is that if someone looks like they're pushing back, I ask them my question number 1. If I could prove to you that Christianity was true, would you become one? And if they're honest with me, they'll say, no. If they're not being honest, you can tell the reservations, the kind of slipping around the corner trying to answer a 2-word answer with a 12-word sentence to justify. You will know very quickly whether or not you need to invest any more time. If the answer is no, they're on the happiness quest, not the truth quest. But I don't give up on them. All right. At that point in time, you give them the card. If you ever have a change of mind, please call me. Let's just go do pizza. We agree we like pizza.
Well, my question would be, the subject of this is the New Testament reliable?
Yeah.
If it's not reliable, what do I have to go on?
If it's not reliable, we're all in trouble. Okay.
I agree.
We're in deep doo-doo if it's not reliable. The 2 things. Knowing that the New Testament is reliable and being able to answer the question, 1 Peter 3:15, being ready to give an answer for the hope that is within you gratefully and respectfully. Giving an answer. What's the Greek word? Apologia, thus apologetics. We are commanded by Peter, or by God through Peter, to always be ready to give an answer. So when someone comes up to me and says, I don't believe the Bible, I should be ready to give an answer. All right, that's one. The other reason is if you find out that they're really on the happiness quest, make a note somewhere to check back in a week or 2 or a month or a year. A lot of my family's my mother was in the happiness quest. That hurt. And I lost that one. I don't want to lose any more.
I have a concern that if I grew up believing that God is real,
Mm-hmm.
I was in one of my master's classes, and my
Yeah.
professor said, raise your hand if you can prove God is not alive, real. I know God is real. I know He's real.
Yeah.
I know.
I mathematically, James, mathematically, I would be very comfortable standing up and saying, as a scientist and a statistician, I'll give you about 30 or 40 mathematical reasons why he's alive, why he exists. And that's what I'm hoping to give a little bit to these groups through apologetics, because whatever I can do to make you feel more comfortable to stand up and say, yes, he is alive. Now, I don't expect you to be able to talk about cosmology, Kalam, intelligent design, the mathematics of statistics and so forth. I don't expect you to do that. But I do expect you to say, but I know a guy who does. Here, I got his card. And then if he refuses the card, go for pizza because he's on the happiness quest. So really, I want to give you enough background that you feel comfortable standing up and saying, God is real. And then I also want to give you enough comfort so that any doubts you have are probably not worth worrying
I
about.
don't have a problem with my belief that God is alive.
Yeah.
My problem is not at all with that. The other guy's problem who's got to prove him that he is. My professor said, well, you just, I believe God is, now you prove that he is.
Okay.
So I have to work the rest of my life trying to go, where will I get my evidence?
All right. Rhetoric and debate 101. When someone comes up and says something off the cuff that's a little bit unusual, remember this. It is not your job to prove him wrong. It's his job to prove he's right. Don't accept the ball
correct.
into your court.
That is correct.
All right. Do not accept the ball into your court if something off the wall comes. You resort to the Columbo method, I call it. Actually, Greg Kukul calls it the Columbo method. Yes, 3 questions. The first question is, what exactly do you mean by that? Because you got to be talking about the same thing. Evolution is true. All right. Are you talking about microevolution or macroevolution? Are you talking about a bacteria in your stomach called E. coli getting a resistance? Or are you talking about something going from the goo to the zoo to you? All right. So question number 1 is get on the same track, talking about the same thing. Question number 2, and this is the most important one, where's your source for that belief? Where did you get that from? What's your sourcing? And that's where they usually fall apart because it's like, well, I heard it from a third position from 7 people that one guy saw it on the internet. That falls apart quick. But if you do get them through that, then the third question is, have you ever thought about, and then you give them the other one. And if none of that works, give them your number, hope for the change.
You ever heard of a man named Friedrich Nietzsche?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've read them.
He wrote a sign up in New
Yeah.
York Times Square.
Yeah.
It said, God is dead, signed Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah.
About a week later, a sign was replaced, said, Friedrich Nietzsche is dead, signed God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the fact is that we all gonna die.
Yeah.
We all gonna die. Whether we believe it or not, we all gonna die. That's just revolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why would I waste my time going through life trying to prove something that I can't prove?
I wouldn't.
And you just brought the right argument.
I wouldn't prove something's wrong. It's their job to prove they're right.
Right.
I do not accept losses before I start. If someone is not going to become a Christian, I don't want to waste my time. Do you like a pizza? I'm not going to waste time. All right. Good question, by the way. Good conversation. I'd much rather do this than teach. All right. I honestly believe that everybody in here, if you've only got 3 friends in the world, if you have a good understanding of why Christianity is what it is, it gives you more confidence that you can deal with other people. But there are going to be people you cannot win. Trust me. I'll never see my mother again. But that's another whole topic. Okay. So after many generations, the copies may actually be better than the original. Questions or comments? All right, we can believe the copies now. Again, as usual, we don't have 100%. There's not a thing that we can do to get 100%. Why? We don't have God's mind. We don't have his knowledge. We don't know how he did what he did. And I think, honestly, he wants us to not. He leaves us a little gap that we got to fill up with what we call faith. So it's the preponderance of the evidence or beyond a reasonable doubt. It's almost never 100%, except maybe death and taxes. Right? All right. So how do we spread these copies? In 303, Emperor Diocletian ordered all copies of the scriptures burned. So here's a guy who was in control of the Roman Empire that ordered every copy everywhere in all the churches burned. And most of them were. There's a very narrowing of the number of copies we got to work with through that period of time. 13 years later, along comes Emperor Constantine. Remember what Emperor Constantine is famous for? He went to battle and he saw a cross in the sky or cloud formation or something that looked like a cross. And he basically said, well, Christianity must be true. I'll believe it. Then he won the battle. And he was so impressed by that, he basically did a 180 and he supported Christianity. What he did was he came up with the Edict of Milan, 313. So 10 years earlier, we burn all the Bibles. 10 years earlier, we burned them. And now in 313, we put out the Edict of Milan. And I know you can't read that from here. But if you could read it, this right here, that's the Edict of Milan. Okay? Written, I think that's in Latin. I don't speak Latin, so I've got a copy of the Latin Bible, but called the Vulgate. I can't read it. Anyway, Edict of Milan. What it said was freedom of worship for all Christians and others. Okay, all Christians and others. Back then, they have groups of people that would be most like what we would call gypsies. Okay, kind of off to themselves and wandering and having some strange thoughts. So all Christians and others had freedom of worship. Today we're saying, okay, you can be a Christian, but you can also be a Wiccan. Okay, you can be a witch. He returned all the confiscated property. When earlier they were burning the books, they also stole all the value from the churches. Out with it. He ordered it returned, confiscated property. And then he asked Eusebius to have 50 copies of scripture made for the churches of Constantinople. One town, very large town, Constantinople. Eusebius, and here's a word, let me plug. Eusebius was like 300 and, I think 304, no, right around 300 to about 350 he lived. And he is an extraordinary historian. And he wrote fantastic stuff. And a lot of the stuff that we get today that tells us how the New Testament was interpreted and applied and preached comes from Eusebius. I've got a copy of his work. And so literally you can go back and you can read Eusebius if you want to know how this particular church preached this particular thing in this particular year. All right. So he asked Eusebius to have 50 copies of scripture made for the churches of Constantinople. Relatively speaking, the Church of Constantinople today would be like the Memphis. Okay, something about that size relative to the countryside. So imagine paying to have 50 copies for churches in Constantinople when each of those copies is going to cost him 30,000 denarii. He made an investment. He put his money where his mouth is. By 800 AD, so obviously they had to hire a whole bunch of copiers and train up a bunch of copiers. By 800 AD, 500 years later, the monks took over the job of making copies. So literally, the monks on the monasteries became the copy machine for the Bible. And that lasted pretty much right up until who? Thank you. Yeah, yeah. So basically from 800 AD up to about 1540, 1530, the monks were out there making copies. And they weren't getting paid a denarii or two. They were getting food, water, a roof over their head. They probably slept on a stone, but they were dedicated. They gave it their all. All right. So where is it going? Remember, I said it was spread by travel copies. Egypt is an interesting study to look at. Let me go here. Acts 2:8 and following. And this is when Peter's doing his preaching to the crew and explaining all about Christianity and so forth. And he ends up getting 3,000 baptized. He says, and how is it that we each hear them in our own language, to which we were born, Parthians and Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the districts of Libya around Cyrene, visitors from Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs, we hear them in our own tongues. What this is saying is the word got out there. Did all of these thousands of people that came to Jerusalem for the holidays, for the Pentecost, stayed there? No. Most of them went home. And what did they go home with? They went home with the gospel in their own language. All right? So we know that it spread. And one of the places it spread was to Egypt. However, the translations from that original spread of the Bible, the gospel, into Egypt, the translations were in what's called Coptic. Coptic is it's an Egyptian-style language that doesn't use hieroglyphs. It uses something close to the Greek alphabet. And this is an actual copy. This is this is Luke 5:9. And if you can read, if you're a Marty, you can read that. I think I can't, but anyway. But that's in a kind of a Greek letters, some variation. But that's went to Egypt. The problem with Egypt, let me just cover this one. There's very little historical knowledge from the early Coptic, not because they were written in another language, but because the Egyptian Christianity went off the rail quickly. Almost as quick as, who was that Philip was riding in the chariot with and baptized him, and off he went. There you go. And he heads back to, I guess he was going to Egypt, wasn't he? I'm not sure. Anyway, the folks who were headed back to Egypt, there may have just been 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 people heading back there with this message. It's amazing how quick that message, when they start making copies, they changed it. There were all sorts of Gnosticisms, and remember, Gnosticism is knowing something, thinking that in order to be a Christian, you had to know these secrets and these special handshakes and the things you got to say when you meet on the street, all this Gnostic stuff. So much so that literally the rest of the world, all around Jerusalem and Middle East and so forth, they said, those Egyptians, no way. I think it was the Gospel of Thomas. I think it was the Gospel. It's not a book in the Bible, but it was a book that was written about the time of the Bible. They've got a copy of the Gospel of Thomas that was written in Coptic. And when you lay the Greek version against the Coptic version, it's like, huh? The one's really off the rails. So yes, it did spread. However, in some places, it did a poor job of spreading. It spread some false stuff. But we don't have much. We have very little research from academic type studies that gives worthwhile analysis of the stuff that went to Egypt. All right, how are we going here? All right. All right, then we come into standardization. So we've got all these copies spreading out. Some of them are really not very good. Some of them are better than others. But we've got all kinds of sermons being delivered and preached and so forth and so on. Now we're dealing with a thing that as you go from town to town, you may be hearing the same topic that has the same ultimate meaning, but it has a localized flavor to it. All right. How do we standardize this? How do we get to the point where we are literally all singing off the same page in the hymnal? And that's where the standardization comes in. And the standardization was forced by Rome's decline. So remember, starting in probably about the time of Paul, the Roman Empire was not friendly with Christianity, persecuted them, prosecuted them, hung Peter upside down, all sorts of stuff. And it wasn't until 313 that they got permission to be Christians. But then shortly after 313, the Roman Empire started going downhill. As the Roman Empire declined, as the influence of 313, as Rome went down, because of the necessity of being able to speak with the other churches, the church actually became more standardized. They started getting more agreement between churches. The Greek language was probably I'm a step ahead of me. The Greek language is probably one of the things that was most instrumental in standardizing the gospel. Basically, from 30 AD to 250 AD, really what held this thing together was the fact that they used Greek language. The Greek language has a lot of differences from what we're used to in English. Okay, English is a very lazy language. Okay, Greek, however, is a very strict language. And if you go in and you start looking at Greek text, almost all words in Greek are going to have different endings or different insertions or different precepts that change the meaning of the word. You may have the verb to speak, and you can literally, by adding endings and so forth, come up with you speak, you spoke, you will speak. All the stuff that we use other words to define is actually built right into the Greek. So and it's no order. I mean, it is not order dependent. Okay. What was that saying? I can't remember that. But anyway, if you rearrange the words of an English sentence, it can really change the sentence. Okay. The one about it's time to eat, Grandma. Yeah. It's time to eat, Grandma. What is it also time to eat, Grandma? Okay. You see what I'm driving at? Even if you change the emphasis of one to the other, in English, it gets messed up. Can get messed up. In the Greek, you don't have to worry about the word order because literally in the Greek, it says this is the noun, this is the verb, and this is the accusative form, this is the dative form, this is the genitive form, and so forth. And you actually know where they go. Who's the object? Who's the corollary object? All these other things. So knowing Greek back then standardized the word wonderfully. And basically, it was a primary language right up to 250 AD when Latin started to take over. All right, then Latin becomes the language of the church, scholars, and government from 250 to 1300. Latin is a little bit better than English, but nowhere near Greek. I say Greek is good. There is some problem. There's some drawbacks to Greek. Greek does not have as many words as we do. Okay, Greek can be confusing, not because it doesn't explain how the words fit together, but Greek has maybe 5,000, 6,000 base lexical words, and there are more than 5,000 things we talk about. So a single Greek word may have to take on 3 or 4 or 5 different meanings. So in that respect, you got translation issues. I think I mentioned the word sound in English. It's called polysemy. The word sound in English has 19 different meanings. Verbs, adjectives, nouns, adverbs, participles, conjunctives. The word sound, there's a word for sound for each of those, which is what the problem is with Greek. So while Greek did have an excellent structure, the problems from Greek usually came from what definition of that word were they using in the sentence. Okay. Latin then becomes the language of the church and the government from 250 to 1300 AD. I say Latin's better than English, not as good as Greek, but none of them are perfect. All right, a guy by the name of Saint Jerome was a protege of Pope Damasus. What Pope Damasus did was assign Saint Jerome to pull together all the variant copies of the Vulgata Latina. So the Latin, because it was the language of the church, of the government, all the Greek stuff was starting to be copied into Latin. Latin was used in the church. However, this church might use a slightly different variation than that one, and over a period of 100 years or so, now they got a whole bunch of different copies of the Latin Vulgate that don't line up, don't agree. There's conflict between them. So Pope Damasus assigns St. Jerome to go around and collect all the variant copies of the Vulgate Latin New Testament in 382, and he used the Codex Vaticanus as the starting point. This is the other of 3 big ones: Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus, and Codex Alexandrinus. Codex Vaticanus is a complete copy of the Bible, all the books, written in Greek, all right, the original Greek. And he started with the original Greek Codex Vaticanus, set it side by side with the Vulgate, and then looked at all the different variations he had. All right, and every time he finds a difference on this book to this, he said, "What does this book say this is?" From Greek back, Latin over. And he's doing this number, and he literally he rewrote the Vulgate. He rewrote it into something that could be trusted, and it was uniform, and all the churches could use it. And we're back to making copies of that book now. Right? By 390, he published the official Vulgate New Testament. So by 390, we have official Vulgate New Testament, and this Vulgate basically lasts all the way up to like the 1300s in the Catholic Church. In fact, if you go look at the Bible that's on the stand up in front of a Catholic church, you're liable to find a copy of the Vulgate written in Latin. Okay? Anyway, so the Vulgate then becomes the overriding source of biblical knowledge from 390 AD onward. I got to speed up. Yeah. All right, translated the Latin version of the Old Testament based on the Septuagint into the Vulgate. Remember that Septuagint? 70 guys getting together in Egypt to make a Greek version of the, make a Hebrew version of the Greek version of the Old. I'm getting confused here. We got to end up with a Hebrew version, I think. Yeah. Greek to Hebrew of the Old Testament. So Christ quoted most often the Septuagint. And the Septuagint, written back in 150 BC, all Yeah, BC. That was the authority for the Old Testament. Remember, Greek is the New Testament, Hebrew is now the Old Testament, and he translated the Latin version of the Old Testament based on the Septuagint into the Vulgate. So basically, the two books are coming together, Old Testament, New Testament, to get something it's in Latin that can go forward for the church. Everything the church wanted to do, they wanted to do in Latin. Completed that in 405. Still standardizing. Okay. I got to standardize faster. All right, so the Vulgate standard up until Erasmus was requested to rewrite the Latin. So here we go again. Now we're into 1512. We've got 900 years, 800 years later. That copy is starting to get sloppy, and stuff's showing up in the books that it doesn't need to be. So Erasmus is assigned to update the Latin, clean that mess up. To demonstrate that he did a good job, what he did was he used the best copy of the Greek that they could find, the best copy of the original book's language. So the New Testament written in Greek, he went back to as far back into the codexes and parchments and all that stuff to find the original Greek, and he used that to supplement and refine the Latin. All right. So anytime there was a difference of opinion between the Vulgate and Latin and the Greek, he chose the Greek. And just to make sure everybody had an opportunity to know he proved it, he went ahead and copied the entire New Testament, assembled it all together in the Greek. So now we have what's known as a clean copy of both the Greek and the Vulgate and the Latin. It was published by Furban in 1516, and it becomes the official Greek New Testament, the Novum Testamentum. And you'll hear Marty, you hear other people from the pulpit and other classrooms talk about Textus Receptus. So the Textus Receptus, TR, the Textus Receptus then becomes the official Greek version of the New Testament for almost all the other books right up until today. There are still versions of the Bible based on the Textus Receptus with a little bit of update. So Codex Vaticanus in Greek, one of the three major books-like things, becomes the Vulgate in the Latin and the Textus Receptus in the Greek. The Textus Receptus becomes the foundation of the German Luther Bible, all the English verbal versions, William Tyndale's New Testament, King James Version, New King James, Geneva, and the Spanish Reina Valera. Okay, so this is the version of the language in these Bibles that most of us grew up with, the King James Version, the New King James Version. Okay? And that's really about as far as I can go in the time I got, which happens to work out good. Q&A. This is your time. Another question like that? Is a good question? Okay. I've either overwhelmed you or put you to sleep. So I'll see you next week. Yeah, thank you. Take care.